My son called me before sunrise and said, "Start the coffee and set the table now." Naomi Vance stepped out of the glass doors of her prestigious downtown law firm with applause still ringing faintly in her ears. She just closed a massive corporate case, the kind that promised a glowing review, a hefty bonus, and more doors opening in every direction. Yet as she crossed the lobby and smiled at colleagues congratulating her, a hollow weight sat in her chest. The victory felt like it belonged to someone else. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Julian. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. By the time she pulled up outside their elegant Buckhead brownstone, the afternoon sky had turned a soft gold. From the street, their home looked picture-perfect. Polished brick, manicured plants, warm light spilling from the living room windows. Inside, though, the silence felt wrong. Julian's sport coat hung on the back of the sofa, and a half-finished whiskey rested on the glass coffee table, but he wasn't in his usual chair. "Julian," Naomi called, setting her briefcase down and unbuckling her heels. The fridge door thudded shut in the kitchen. Julian appeared a moment later, crisp shirt, sharp trousers, every hair perfectly in place. His smile brushed across his face like something rehearsed, not felt. "You're home early," he said lightly, though his eyes flicked over her with a strange measuring look. "I wrapped the case ahead of schedule," she replied. "Thought we could have dinner together. Like we used to." He paused, considering her, then nodded. "Sure. I'll order something." Didn't have time to cook. While he scrolled through his phone to place a takeout order, Naomi watched him carefully, seeing what she'd been trying to ignore for weeks. The distance. The manufactured charm. The way his patience had worn thin at the smallest things. Her husband, once her safest person, now felt like a stranger she was sharing a life with. They ate sushi in front of the TV, the glow of the screen casting pale light over their faces. Naomi tried to break through the ice. "How's the Onyx Lounge?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Still packed every night." Julian didn't look up from his food. "It's fine. People always find a reason to drink. Business is good." "You're hardly ever home," she continued. "Feels like I only see you in passing now." A flash of irritation crossed his eyes before he smoothed it over. "I'm working for our future. You know how it is." The conversation withered after that. Julian retreated to the bedroom early, claiming exhaustion, while Naomi stayed in the living room with her laptop open and her mind racing. She told herself she was just checking emails, but her gaze kept drifting toward his phone, abandoned on the coffee table. There had been a time when there were no passwords between them. When she'd known his PIN because he'd typed it right in front of her, not because she'd quietly memorized it. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the device, unlocked it, and opened his messages. Most threads were mundane, business-related. Then she saw one labeled simply, P. The last message made her chest clench. "All set for tomorrow. Remember, there can't be any mistakes." Naomi stared at the screen, her pulse pounding in her ears. It could have been about the club. A business deal. Security. Anything. But every alarm in her body blared at once. She barely had time to lock the phone and set it down before Julian's footsteps sounded in the hallway. "Still working?" he asked from the doorway, his tone edged with something almost accusatory. "Yeah," she said, closing her laptop a little too quickly. "Just finishing up some briefs." He watched her for a moment, unreadable, then turned away. Naomi remained on the sofa long after he'd disappeared, feeling the first real fracture in the foundation of their marriage. Someone was lying. And she was increasingly certain it wasn't her. Days later, at a dinner with close friends, Julian played the role of attentive husband without missing a beat. Laughing at jokes, topping off wine glasses, squeezing Naomi's shoulder at just the right moments. To everyone else, they were the picture of a polished, successful couple. Naomi felt like a mannequin in a staged photograph. In the restroom, her best friend Chloe cornered her gently. "You've been quiet all night. What's wrong?" "Nothing," Naomi lied, dabbing her lipstick in the mirror. "Court stuff." I'm just tired. Chloe gave her a look that said she didn't believe a word. You know I'm here if you need me, right? I know, Naomi said, managing a thin smile. Thank you. Later, from the passenger seat of their car, she watched Julian through the windshield as he lingered in the parking lot talking to one of the men from dinner. The man handed Julian a bulging envelope. Julian slipped it inside his jacket with a quick, practiced motion. On the drive home, Naomi tried to keep her voice steady. What was that about? Club business, Julian said, eyes fixed on the road. Nothing you need to worry about. The cold dismissal cut deeper than she expected. That night, as the city lights glittered beyond the windows of their bedroom, Naomi lay awake beside a man whose breathing was slow and even, as if he carried no burdens at all. She felt like she was lying next to an open secret. When his phone buzzed again on the nightstand and he didn't stir, she checked the screen. Another message from P. Don't fail. The words burned into her mind. Fear curled in her gut, but beneath it was something else, an instinct honed from years of studying criminals in court. Something was very, very wrong. By morning, her decision was made. Naomi might not know what Julian was planning, but she knew how to find out. The next day at the office, Naomi tried to bury herself in billable hours. Contracts and filings blurred together as she stared blankly at her computer screen. Her assistant, Elena, poked her head into the office with a sympathetic frown. You look like you pulled an all-nighter, Elena said. You okay? Just juggling too many files, Naomi answered, forcing a yawn. I'll be fine. Once Elena left, Naomi closed her laptop and reached for her phone instead. The number she dialed belonged to a man whose name rarely appeared on paper, but frequently in whispered conversations among lawyers who needed answers they couldn't get through normal channels. Darius Stone, came the low, calm voice on the other end. Mr. Stone, this is Naomi Vance, she said quietly. I need your help. And it has to stay off the record. They met that evening in a quiet corner of a small coffee shop on the edge of town. Naomi wore a scarf and oversized sunglasses, feeling faintly ridiculous and yet painfully exposed. Darius arrived without fanfare, dressed in neutral clothes that made him blend into the background. He carried a battered notebook and a sharp gaze. What do you need me to look into? He asked once they were seated. Naomi swallowed hard. Saying it out loud felt like crossing an invisible line. My husband, she said. I think he's involved in something criminal. And I'm starting to believe I might be in danger. She told him about the messages from P, the envelope in the parking lot, the sudden change in Julian's behavior. Darius listened without interrupting, jotting down notes. I can follow him, track his meetings, dig into his finances, he said when she finished. But if I find what you're afraid of, you need to be ready to act on it. Sometimes the truth leaves no way back. Naomi nodded, her stomach twisting. Find whatever you can. I'd rather know than walk blindly into whatever he's planning. Days later, a thick envelope landed on Naomi's desk at work. The name on the corner was a fake, but the handwriting was Darius's. She locked her office door before opening it. Inside were surveillance photos, grainy shots of Julian in a dark alley behind the Onyx Lounge, shaking hands with a broad-shouldered man with scars etched across his face. Another set showed them leaning close, talking intensely. Paper-clipped to the photos was a report. Duke Miller, known associate of organized crime, connected to disappearances and extortion, suspected of arranging solutions for clients with problems they want to disappear. Naomi's heart slammed against her ribs. Her law career had brought her face to face with predators and manipulators, but always from the insulated distance of a courtroom. Seeing her husband standing shoulder to shoulder with a man like this felt like having the floor ripped out from under her. She called Darius immediately. Why is Julian meeting someone like Duke? She demanded, her voice shaking. That's what I'm still digging into, Darius replied. But there's more. I intercepted some of their communications. They keep referring to the plan. No names. No dates. But the tone is bad. Dangerous. Naomi gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Do you think the plan is about me? I can't say for sure yet, Darius said. But if your instincts say you're the target, you have to take that seriously. I recommend going to the police. This is bigger than a private investigation now. That night, at dinner, Naomi studied Julian across the table, trying to see the man from the surveillance photos instead of the charming club owner he pretended to be. You've been working a lot, she said carefully, stirring her food more than eating it. I worry you might be getting mixed up with shady people at the club. You know, security, money, that kind of thing. Julian's fork froze halfway to his mouth. For a moment, his expression hardened, then smoothed over. Why would you say that? He asked softly. Here's something I should know about? No, she replied quickly. I just want you safe. That's all. He watched her a beat longer, as if trying to read between her words. Then he smiled without warmth and changed the subject. Naomi felt the air between them grow heavier. The next morning, she walked into Atlanta's Zone 5 precinct, her tailored suit and professional poise doing little to steady her racing heart. The man she met inside had graying hair, tired eyes, and a calm presence that spoke of years dealing with other people's worst days. Detective Marcus Jones, he said, motioning for her to sit. I've heard your name before, Ms. Vance. What brings a corporate attorney to my office? Naomi laid Darius's report, the photographs, and printed copies of Julian's messages on the desk between them. The words came out smoother than she expected. I believe my husband is arranging to have me killed, she said. Detective Jones looked from her face to the evidence, then back again. He flipped slowly through the pages, his expression darkening. This is serious, he said finally. If what you're telling me is true, we can't rush this. We'll need something solid, admissions, recordings, transfers that tie it all together. If we move too early, he'll vanish. Or worse. He met her eyes with a steady gaze. Are you willing to work with us to set up a sting? Naomi's pulse thundered, but she nodded. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure he never gets the chance to hurt me. From that moment, Naomi wasn't just a client or a wife. She became the centerpiece of a dangerous operation, one that would demand more courage from her than any courtroom had ever required. The plan took shape over long hours in a cramped briefing room filled with whiteboards, photographs, and exhausted officers. Detective Jones laid it out step by step, his tone leaving no room for misunderstanding. We already have Darius's work, he said, nodding toward the folder. Now we need Julian's own words to seal this. We're putting an undercover informant into Duke's circle. If they talk openly about the hit, we'll have what we need. The informant, Leo Walker, Leo to his allies, Walker in police files, was a man with the kind of rough edges and street credibility that made dangerous people talk. He earned Duke's trust by moving shipments and keeping his mouth shut. Meanwhile, his hidden microphone sent every word to Detective Jones's team. One night, the audio captured exactly what they'd been waiting for. She's got no idea, Julian's voice said, cold and almost bored. We just stick to routine. She follows patterns. By the time anyone realizes, it'll be over. You better be sure, Duke replied. I don't want heat from this. No loose ends. Trust me, Julian answered. When she's gone, everything she has is mine. Then we walk away clean. Naomi sat in Detective Jones's office as the recording played. Hearing her husband talk about her like a problem to be erased sliced through whatever faint hope she had left. She fixed her gaze on the table, jaw clenched, shoulders rigid. Is this enough? She asked when the recording ended. To arrest him? It's strong, Jones said. But I want something undeniable. Something a jury can't twist or excuse. We need to catch him reacting to your death. That's where the staged accident comes in. Her stomach lurched. She'd agreed in theory when they floated the idea, but hearing it described in blunt, practical terms made it suddenly very real. You're asking me to let the world think I'm dead, she said quietly. I'm asking you to help us stop this network from ever doing this to someone else, Jones replied. If we pull this off, Julian hangs himself with his own words. And Duke with him. You'll be under our protection from start to finish. Naomi stared at the blueprint of the operation spread across the table, a lonely stretch of road outside the city, marked camera positions, the wrecked car, the medical team, the anonymous call to the club. Her own name, circled in red ink at the center. All right, she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. Let's do it. The night of the operation, the world felt unreal. At an old warehouse staging area, special effects technicians transformed Naomi into the image of a crash victim. Fake blood, carefully placed bruises, artful cuts that looked horrifying but washed off with soap and water. She caught her reflection in a cracked mirror and had to look away. Is all this really necessary? She asked the makeup artist. Out there, people see what they expect, he said. We need Julian to believe this at a glance. That's how we get him to show his true face. Later, Naomi lay still on the cold asphalt of a desolate road, a sheet draped over most of her body. The damaged car smoldered nearby, having been carefully staged to look like it had slammed into the guardrail. Hidden cameras watched from the trees. Microphones waited to capture every word. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure the officers around her could hear it. Detective Jones crouched beside her before stepping back. If at any point you panic, we pull you out, he murmured. But I won't lie, this is our best shot. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. At the Onyx Lounge, an officer placed the anonymous call. Your wife's been in a serious accident. She's in critical condition, he told Julian with a voice that held just enough urgency. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Through the tiny speaker in her ear, Naomi heard engine noise, then screeching tires. Julian's car came into view, headlights slicing through the darkness. He climbed out, slammed the door, and paused. Naomi, still motionless under the sheet, listened as his footsteps approached, and then stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, he didn't come closer. Didn't shout her name. Didn't ask if she was alive. So I didn't have to pay for it in the end, he muttered, his voice low but clear enough for the microphones. Guess fate did the job for me. Naomi's chest burned. Every instinct screamed at her to sit up and face him, but she forced herself to stay still. Julian stepped closer, peering down at what he believed was her lifeless body. Too bad, Naomi, he said softly. At least now everything's mine. He pulled out his phone and dialed. P, he said when the line picked up. It's done. Not the way we planned, but she's gone. Give it a little time, then we move forward. In the surveillance van, Detective Jones didn't wait another second. Move in, he ordered. Lights burst from the darkness as police vehicles surrounded the scene. Officers rushed in, shouting commands. Julian spun around, shocked, trying to protest as hands grabbed him and forced him to the ground. What is this? He shouted. Get off me. She's dead. The sheet rustled as Naomi sat up, lungs dragging in a shaky breath. An officer helped her to her feet, steadying her. When Julian saw her alive, his face drained of color. You, he hissed, eyes wide with fury. You set me up. You set yourself up, Naomi replied, voice hoarse but firm. I just finally stopped pretending not to see you. As Julian was driven away in handcuffs, the night felt eerily quiet again. Naomi stood beside the crumpled car, the cold seeping through her skin. She should have felt safe. Instead, she felt hollow. A young officer approached Jones, holding a phone. Detective, a voicemail came in to Naomi's phone. We grabbed it as evidence. You need to hear this. Jones put it on speaker. Duke's rough voice filled the air. You think this is over? He taunted. Julian was never our only option. She talks, we all burn. We're not done yet. Naomi stared at the empty road, the artificial wreckage, the smear of fake blood on her hands. The operation had saved her life, and proved she'd been right all along. But it also made something chillingly clear. Julian had been willing to kill her, and the people standing behind him were still out there. In the days after Julian's arrest, Naomi was moved to a safe location under constant police protection. The room was clean but bare, plain walls, a narrow bed, a small window with blinds half drawn. It felt less like a refuge and more like a holding cell. She sat on the edge of the bed with her phone in her hand, finally dialing Chloe. It was the first time she'd heard her friend's voice since the story hit the news. "Naomi, oh my God," Chloe exclaimed. "I saw everything on TV. Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm surviving," Naomi said. "Julian's in custody. But there are others involved. And they're not going to stop just because he's behind bars." "You're stronger than you think," Chloe replied. "You faced him. You can face the rest. Just don't do it alone." Naomi clung to those words over the next few days as new information surfaced. Leo, still wired and undercover around Duke's associates, sent more recordings to the precinct. One conversation chilled everyone in the room. "She's still breathing," a man said. "As long as she can talk, she's a problem." "Then we fix it," Duke responded. "Julian might be done, but the rest of us aren't going down with him. She disappears before trial. End of story." Detective Jones played the audio twice, jaw tight. "They're planning another attempt," he said. "This proves they're willing to go much further than we thought." Naomi listened, feeling the fear rise and then harden into something like iron. "Then we don't just defend," she said quietly. "We go after all of them." The next recordings went deeper than she could have imagined. Names started to surface. People with clean reputations and polished public profiles who had quietly profited from Duke's services. One of those names hit Naomi like a physical blow. Clayton Albright, Jones read from a report. Connected to shell companies tied to Duke's operations. Multiple suspicious transfers. Naomi's breath caught. Her stepfather's neatly pressed suit and patronizing smile flashed through her mind. Clayton Albright, wealthy businessman, donor, man of influence. He married my mother when I was in my teens," Naomi said slowly. "We were never close. He liked control, not family. But this. You're sure it's him?" Jones turned the screen toward her. Bank logs. Email headers. A photo of Albright shaking hands with a man Naomi now recognized as one of Duke's intermediaries. "We're sure," Jones said. It got worse. Newly intercepted calls revealed Clayton talking to a woman whose voice Naomi knew as well as her own reflection. Her mother. "This is spinning out of control, Adrian," Clayton snapped in one recording. "Your daughter is at the center of this. If she testifies, the whole house comes down." "I told you to handle it sooner," Adrian shot back. Her voice was sharp, stripped of the gentle warmth Naomi remembered. "Now she's cooperating with the police. We won't survive this if she keeps digging." Naomi couldn't listen any further. She stood abruptly, pacing the room, hands pressed to her temples. "My mother knew," she said, more to herself than to Jones. "She knew something was happening. And instead of warning me, she chose him. We had to confirm it before showing you," Jones said quietly. "I'm sorry. I know this hurts. But we need you to be clear-headed. These calls make them both part of the conspiracy." Hours later, the plan to raid Albright's estate was ready. Naomi stayed in an unmarked van with Jones, watching live feeds from the officers' body cams. The mansion looked just as she remembered from brittle holiday gatherings. Marble floors, curated artwork, perfectly trimmed hedges. Inside, chaos had replaced polish. Files lay scattered. Shouts echoed through the hallways. Officers burst into a study where Clayton and Adrian stood arguing over a table piled with documents. "You have no right to be in my home," Clayton barked as they handcuffed him. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Adrian looked straight into one of the cameras, her expression a strange blend of defiance and weariness. Arresting a mother won't fix anything, she said. You're tearing a family apart. You did that yourself, Naomi whispered from the safety of the van. Later, Adrian sat alone in an interrogation room, her hands cuffed, shoulders hunched. Naomi watched from behind the one-way glass, heart hammering. The woman on the other side of the glass looked smaller than she remembered, but the damage she'd helped cause felt enormous. Do you want to talk to her? Jones asked gently. I have to, Naomi replied. I can't move forward without hearing her say it. Inside the room, Naomi took a seat opposite her mother. The silence between them was heavier than any argument they'd ever had. Why? Naomi asked at last. Her voice was raw. Why did you stand by him? Why didn't you tell me? Adrian lifted her gaze, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. You think it was simple, she said quietly. Clayton promised security, status, protection. He told me everything was under control, that nothing would touch you. And when he decided I was the problem? Naomi demanded. When I was the one who needed to disappear. Adrian flinched. By the time I realized how far it had gone, it was too late. I tried to convince him to find another way. He wouldn't listen. You were an asset, Naomi. An obstacle, in his mind. He doesn't care about people the way you do. Tears burned behind Naomi's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. You had a choice, she said. You chose him. Adrienne's shoulders sagged. I chose survival, she whispered. And I was wrong. Naomi stood, the chair scraping softly behind her. You chose cowardice, she said. And now we all live with the consequences. She walked out without looking back, leaving her mother in a silence that felt final. That night, Naomi sat once again in a room full of evidence. Bank records, recordings, confiscated files. The network that had quietly arranged violence and silenced problems for years was finally visible, its threads stretching from back alleys to corporate boardrooms. You helped bring this all down, Jones said, handing her a mug of coffee. It's not just about your case anymore. We're opening investigations that never would have seen daylight without you. Naomi stared at the evidence spread over the table. Her marriage, her family, her sense of safety, everything had been broken open. And yet, somewhere under the ache, a fragile sense of purpose stirred. They wanted me gone because I could expose them, she said. I won't waste that chance. The arrests were only the beginning. The trials would decide what came next. Months later, the courthouse buzzed with whispers and media crews. What had started as an attempted murder plot had grown into a sweeping case about corruption, criminal networks, and the price of silence. Naomi sat at the front of the courtroom beside the prosecution team, her posture straight, hands clasped to hide the faint tremor in her fingers. She could feel dozens of eyes on her. The public, the press, strangers curious about the lawyer whose own life had become a headline. Across the room sat the people who had once quietly shaped her world. Julian, dressed in a suit that no longer impressed her. Duke, lounging in his chair with a smirk that said he'd seen worse. Clayton Albright, rigid and composed, refusing to let even a flicker of emotion show. And Adrian, her mother, small and tired, avoiding her daughter's gaze. The prosecution began with a meticulous recounting of events. The messages from P, the payments to Duke, the recorded conversations, the staged accident, the calls intercepted from Albright and Adrian. Piece by piece, the story that had nearly ended Naomi's life was laid bare under bright fluorescent lights and careful legal language. When it was time to play the recording of Julian and Duke discussing the plan, the room fell utterly silent. Julian's voice filled the space, calm, confident, discussing Naomi's fate like he was planning a business expansion. She won't see it coming, the recording played. By the time anyone realizes, she'll be gone. Julian kept his eyes on the table while his own words echoed off the courtroom walls. Naomi felt the old hurt surge inside her, but this time it was tempered by something else, a sense that she'd taken back control simply by being here to hear those words. Next came the evidence against Albright: financial charts, corporate shell structures, transfers routed through offshore accounts. To anyone else, it might have looked like a dense financial puzzle. To Naomi, it was a map of every compromise Clayton had made in the name of power. Then the calls with Adrian were played. Naomi listened as her mother's voice, once familiar and comforting, discussed her as though she were a chess piece. "If she testifies, this will destroy us," Adrian said in the recording. "We should have ended this earlier." No one in the room spoke. No one had to. The horror was plain enough in the silence that followed. When Naomi took the stand, she spoke clearly and steadily. She walked the jury through her suspicions: the private investigator, the meeting with Detective Jones, the decision to stage her death. She didn't dramatize. She didn't soften. She told the truth. "At some point," she said, "I realized that if I stayed quiet, I was helping them. And if I let them kill me, they would just move on to the next problem. I couldn't let that happen." Her testimony ended, but the echo of her words stayed in the room. After weeks of hearings, cross-examinations, and closing arguments, the jury reached their verdicts. The courtroom was packed when the judge read them aloud. "Julian Vance," the judge said, "for conspiracy to commit murder and money laundering, this court sentences you to 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of early release." Julian's jaw clenched, but he didn't look at Naomi. "Francisco Duke Miller, for conspiracy and participation in organized criminal activity, you are sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, with limited eligibility for parole." Duke merely smirked, as though 25 years were an inconvenience, not a lifetime. "Clayton Albright," the judge continued, "for corruption, conspiracy to commit murder, and manipulation of public contracts, you are sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole." There was a murmur among the observers at the severity of the sentence. Albright's face tightened, a small crack in his careful composure. The judge turned to the last defendant. "Adrian Albright, for conspiracy to commit murder and accessory after the fact, you are sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, with possible parole after serving half your sentence." Adrian finally lifted her eyes toward Naomi, but Naomi did not meet her gaze. The bond between them had been severed in a way no sentence could repair. When the proceedings ended, Naomi stepped out of the courthouse into a storm of microphones and questions. "How does it feel to see them convicted?" one reporter shouted. "Do you forgive your mother?" another asked. Naomi said nothing. She moved through the crowd with Detective Jones at her side until they reached the waiting car. Once inside, Jones looked over at her. "You did it," he said quietly. "Because you stood up. None of them can hurt anyone else that way again." "Justice was done," Naomi replied, watching the courthouse recede through the window. "But I lost more than I can ever get back." "That's true," Jones said. "But you're still here. And that gives you choices they don't have anymore." Months passed. Life didn't snap back into place. It had to be rebuilt from the ground up. Naomi left her old law firm and the path she'd once followed so confidently. Instead, she founded an organization dedicated to helping people who'd survived betrayal, coercion, and hidden violence. People who, like her, had discovered monsters hiding in their own homes. She spent her days listening to others' stories, helping them navigate the justice system, making sure they weren't alone in rooms full of legal language and cold faces. Each case hurt in its own way, but each one also reminded her why she'd chosen this new life. One evening, after a long day organizing a charity event, Naomi returned to her apartment and found a letter in her mailbox. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It was from Adrian. She stood by the kitchen counter for a long time before opening it. The letter inside was short. "Naomi, I know I don't deserve your time, let alone your forgiveness. I just want you to know that I regret everything. The secrets, the silence, the choices I made out of fear instead of love. I'm not asking you to excuse me. I only hope you live a life that isn't chained to what we did. I love you, even if I never showed it the way you needed. Mom." Naomi folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. She didn't know if she would ever fully forgive her mother. But she also knew that clinging to hatred would only bind her to the very people she'd fought so hard to escape. That night, she stood by her window, looking out over the city. The skyline glowed softly against the dark. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt uncertain, fragile, and open. Somewhere, people were still listening to her story, drawing strength from it, passing it on. Maybe they sat in their living rooms or listened on their phones during long commutes. Maybe they would send a small message of support, or share their own stories in return. Naomi didn't need their names to feel their presence. She knew that as long as there were voices willing to speak and ears willing to listen, the darkness she'd faced would never win completely. Her life had been broken, twisted, and rebuilt. And now, piece by piece, she was learning to live it on her own terms. With quiet resolve, she turned away from the window and back to her work, ready for the next story, the next fight, and the next chance to turn pain into something that could help someone else survive.